A chilling autumn evening enveloped the abandoned town in heavy darkness. Elliot and Lucas Blackwoods sat silently in their car, the grim outline of the derelict mansion beginning to take shape before them. Their eyes reflected both doubt and determination simultaneously. Soon, the headlights illuminated the old stone walls, and they stepped out of the car, shrouded in the atmosphere of a place that seemed to breathe its own life. The mansion's door creaked as the brothers entered the dark labyrinth of its corridors. Their flashlights restlessly cast shadows, creating a play of light and darkness. The damp chill surrounded them as if the place's breath awaited their arrival. Ancient, copper, time-worn chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and their dim light created an illusion as if the air itself was heavier here, saturated with the secrets of the past. They moved forward, cautious of creaking floors and muffled sounds emanating from the shadows. The brothers' hearts beat faster with each new door that opened before them. In one of the rooms, an antique furniture set stood, covered in a shroud of dust. Antique mirrors, like eyes, stared at them from the corner. Elliot directed the flashlight toward the table in the center of the room, and at that moment, the light revealed that the old table was covered with traces of parchment. They approached slowly, as if afraid to disturb the eerie equilibrium of this place. Lucas lifted one of the dusty pages. The ink was fading, but the words on the pages began to pulsate, as if eager to be heard. Elliot opened another book, and the pages seemed to ignite with an inner fire, and the ancient letters took on a new breath. The records turned out to be a mixture of magical rituals, forgotten incantations, and warnings about the essence summoned as a result of a failed ceremony becoming part of this place. Elliot and Lucas understood that the mystery of this mansion extended far beyond what they could have imagined. Among the records of magical rituals and forgotten incantations, the brothers stumbled upon a record that seized their attention. The title of this record read, "The Ritual of Eternal Life." Lucas skimmed through the pages, and his eyes widened in horror. Elliot approached closer, and at that moment, his heart raced as if a premonition of evil had enveloped his soul. Before them unfolded a picture of horror, the steps of the ritual that were meant to bestow immortality, but instead tore a rift between worlds, granting access to dark forces lurking in the shadows. Their attention was drawn to the last entry, leaving both of them speechless. The ritual had been completed, and the shadow on the wall began to come to life, as if being summoned back into this world. Dark vortexes slowly emerged from the shadow, pulsating and writhing like something alive, preparing to break free. In terror, the brothers looked out the window, and they beheld a scene that dispelled any thoughts of tranquility. The dark vortexes began to take shape, smoothly merging into one another like funnels, threatening to engulf everything in their path. Lucas closed the book, but the shadow on the wall remained, like a harbinger of impending doom that now gripped this house. In those moments, fear held them to this place, as if they had become witnesses to something that should not exist in reality. Several days had passed since Elliot and Lucas returned from the eerie mansion. They spent their days studying the found records, attempting to unravel the mystery of the ritual that had summoned the dark entity. Night after night, they returned to this grim puzzle, immersing themselves in their research. One evening, when the dimness enveloped the room, Elliot and Lucas heard something unusual. At first, it was just a faint whisper, barely discernible in the silence. They exchanged glances, feeling the hair on their arms stand on end. The sound seemed to emanate from the walls, as if the house itself had begun to whisper its secrets. The whisper gradually grew louder, becoming more distinct. Elliot and Lucas realized that it was something more than just the wind or the creaking of wooden beams. Mysterious phrases began to seep into their consciousness, as if hinting that the entity torn from its world was attempting to communicate with them. The hearts of the brothers beat in unison with every word, as if the entire world had suddenly plunged into this haunting conversation. Gazing at the walls, they attempted to decipher the meaning of this enigmatic whisper. It was a language that had long faded into obscurity but had now come alive in their world. And in every word, ancient wisdom and the voice of the very entity torn between dimensions resonated. But then, the whisper abruptly ceased, as if vanishing suddenly, leaving them in heavy silence. They remained, looking at each other, holding their breath, as if afraid to disrupt the magical connection. Elliot and Lucas realized that the secrets of this place were far from being fully revealed, and that more than just there was intertwined with the fate of this house. The evening cloaked the house in darkness, and the dark corners of the room seemed filled with mysterious life. Elliot and Lucas, sitting in the dimly lit room, began to explore a new path, a path of communication between worlds. They conversed as if communicating with the invisible force that surrounded them. Suddenly, something new and unknown began to permeate the air. Shadows started dancing around them, merging into a unified form. From this form, the outlines of figures began to take shape, as if long-awaited ghosts emerged from the dense fog. Before the brothers stood three apparitions. The first ghost, a tall man in antique clothing, whose features were distorted by time. The second, a young woman in attire from a bygone era, her eyes shining like stars. The third, a gray-haired elder with a wise gaze. His ethereal presence seemed to carry an aura of wisdom. The brothers were simultaneously overwhelmed by horror and admiration. These apparitions were living witnesses of the past, inseparably linked to the mansion's destiny. Their voices sounded like echoes from a distant epic, filling the room with magic and mystery. "We are shadows of the past, trapped in this world, restless and yearning for release," spoke the man, his words seeming to dissolve in the air. "For centuries, we have been prisoners of this house, suspended between worlds, unable to depart. You are the key to our liberation," added the woman, and sparks of hope gleamed in her eyes. "Grant us redemption, break the bonds, and we shall assist you in your endeavors," the elder proclaimed, his voice resonating like the tolling of ancient bells. The brothers listened, hardly believing their ears. They understood that before them stood something greater than mere spirits. These apparitions offered them assistance, but behind that help lay a dark past that could lead to even grimmer consequences. The brothers continued to explore the records left by the ghosts. With each new page, it became clearer that severing the connection between the two worlds and freeing the spirits was a task more challenging than they had imagined. But in their battle against the dark entity that had infiltrated this world, all hope rested in their hands. As they studied the records, the air began to pulsate with energy, as if reality itself was ready to engulf them. They realized that it was time to unveil the secret that would allow them to perform the intricate ritual and banish the evil. Elliot and Lucas began the ceremony in a specially prepared room. At its center stood an artifact they had found in the old records, a crystal, distorted by time but still brimming with magical power. They lit candles and began to recite the words passed down to them by the spirits. The candlelight gradually emitted its energy, filling the room with light and warmth. Soon, the crystal began to glow, emitting a peculiar sound as if calling from a distance. Elliot and Lucas exchanged a determined look. They were prepared for what would come next. When the crystal reached its peak of light and sound, the air began to tremble. The dark entity lurking in the shadows, sensing the threat, started to manifest its power. Swirling vortexes of darkness reached toward the center of the room, as if attempting to disrupt the ritual. The brothers closed their eyes and began to recite the words whispered to them by the spirits. At that moment, the room was filled with unusual sounds and magical energy. They felt their breath become synchronized, as if they had become part of this ancient force. Suddenly, everything came to a halt. The sounds, the light, and the vortexes vanished as if absorbed into the crystal. The brothers opened their eyes and saw that the crystal shimmered one final time, and then darkened, as if it had absorbed the entire malevolent entity. Silence enveloped the room. Elliot and Lucas understood that they had succeeded in severing the connection between the two worlds and banishing the dark entity. They looked at each other, and their eyes reflected a sense of satisfaction and exhaustion. The spirits that had watched over them were now free, and thanks to the brothers, they could leave this world behind, leaving the crystal in the room as a witness to their struggle. The brothers gazed at the abandoned mansion. Mixed feelings of nostalgia and relief washed over them, and as if bidding farewell to this place, they embarked on their journey, knowing that they had accomplished what many deemed impossible. Over time, Elliot and Lucas decided to return to the abandoned mansion where their mystical journey had begun. They entered the house cautiously, as if expecting to encounter what remained in the shadows of the past. But what they saw left them in complete shock. The walls, once withered and dark, now emitted an eerie light, as if something sinister dwelled within the house. The windows, usually covered with curtains, stood wide open, yet darkness reigned outside, refusing to let in any light. The house seemed to consume light and life, turning them into its own void. Their hearts began to race as they stepped inside. The paintings on the walls, once depicting the world's beauty, now portrayed distorted images of fear and darkness. The ghosts now appeared stern and menacing, their eyes gleaming in the darkness like fading embers. The brothers proceeded to the room where their encounter with the mystery had begun. The table that once held records was now covered with a dark shroud, as if the evening darkness had cloaked it from the light. Instead of records, they found parchments with words written in a hunched, dark script. "You have destroyed the one who saved us. Your good deeds have led to our disappearance. Now you are part of us." A voice echoed in their minds, as if its source were the darkest corners of their souls. The brothers exchanged glances, their fear piercing their very souls. They realized that they had not merely encountered a demon, but had become a part of its sinister game. They understood that their actions had awakened an evil that now awaited its release, and they suddenly realized that there was no way back. Trapped in the grip of this mysterious house, Elliot and Lucas were determined to figure out what they had misunderstood or done wrong. Previously, the ghosts they had communicated with had been peaceful and showed no signs of wanting to harm them. Lucas headed to the library of the house, a room lined with antique books and scrolls. All these materials seemed to have accumulated over centuries. Meanwhile, Elliot decided to review the records they had found earlier. In the library, Lucas began with volumes dedicated to demonology. He managed to find an ancient text that mentioned the ritual they had attempted to perform. The text stated that the release of ghosts required not only skill but also a great sacrifice. Without this sacrifice, souls could not cross over to the other side and, conversely, could attract dark entities towards them. Meanwhile, Elliot, while studying the records, discovered a strange cipher. After deciphering it, he realized it was a warning. The words in the cipher read, "Beware of what you awaken. There is a balance between worlds. Do not attempt to alter it." Gathering all the information they had found, the brothers concluded that not only had they freed the ghosts, but they had also disrupted the natural balance between worlds. In doing so, they had drawn the attention of a sinister dark entity. Now, they faced a new task, restoring this balance and banishing the demonic entity they had unknowingly awakened from the depths of darkness. The enigmatic darkness continued to envelop the house, as if attempting to engulf it entirely. Feeling the pressure of these dark forces, Elliot and Lucas decided to embark on a journey in search of answers. They understood that to unravel the mystery and restore order, they needed to learn more about the ancient entity that now held them in its grip. Their journey began in the library, where ancient scrolls and books held a wealth of forgotten knowledge. Amidst dusty shelves and mysterious pages, they began searching for mentions of demons associated with intermediate realms, and rituals that could alter the balance. Hours passed slowly as they immersed themselves in the reading of ancient texts. They discovered vague records and legends intertwined with real facts. Through the shifting sands of time, they glimpsed traces of long-forgotten rites that pointed to a location where the ritual could have been performed. Their bodies grew weary, but they couldn't resist the excitement and fear of what they were uncovering. Finally, in one of the texts, as if hidden deep within the dark recesses of the library, they found a mention of the place where the barrier between worlds had been breached. This place had anciently served as a temple dedicated to powerful forces. Now, it had become a point of contact between worlds, a place where darkness and light intertwined. Without possessing all the information, the brothers decided to journey there in the hope of finding a way to atone for their mistakes and to destroy what they had awakened. Morning came when Elliot and Lucas took their backpacks filled with essential tools and scrolls of knowledge and headed towards the mysterious place they had discovered in the records. The journey to the temple was long and perilous, with an impenetrable darkness shrouding their path, echoing ancient fears. Following ancient maps and directions, they traversed a dense forest where trees seemed like living shadows, and darkness seemed to swallow their every step. Night fell upon them as they reached a place where the darkness became even more menacing. They felt unseen eyes upon them and heard whispers in the wind, as if the very air was conspiring with them. Upon entering the sacred grounds, they saw the temple rising before them like a forgotten relic of time. Its walls were adorned with symbols and drawings left by ancient civilizations. The entrance to the temple was shrouded in mist, as if it were a gateway between worlds. Passing through the mist, the brothers found themselves inside the temple. In the center lay an altar square, adorned with unfamiliar symbols. They began studying the records they had brought with them, and realized that to sever the connection between worlds and atone for their mistakes, they needed to perform a complex ritual. The brothers started arranging scrolls and artifacts according to the instructions. They lit candles and created magical circles, as if attempting to restore the balance they had disrupted with their own hands. Words of prayers and incantations filled the air, creating an aura of magic and tension. At this moment, the darkness grew even denser, and it was as if they were being consumed by ancient memories, hidden fears, and regrets. The ritual began draining their strength, and the brothers felt their past resurfacing, intertwining with the present. They were facing what they had created, the darkness they could not defeat. In this moment, their resolve was put to the test. They understood that to complete the ritual, they needed to confront their own fears. Otherwise, the dark forces would prevail. They continued to hold the incantations in their minds, resisting the dark influences and striving to restore the balance they had disrupted. Their ritual continued, and every moment in the temple felt like an eternity, where magic and the past danced a dangerous dance. Elliot and Lucas continued to perform the intricate ritual, as if composing an elaborate symphony of words and movements. Their voices, mixed with ancient incantations, sounded like a cry of desperation and an invocation to forces stronger than themselves. Suddenly, amidst the darkness and magic, a shadow emerged, standing out with its black essence. Footsteps echoed on the temple floor, as if approaching them. Elliot and Lucas froze, halting the ritual. Their gazes met, and their hearts raced so fast it felt as though they might burst out of their chests. In the darkness, the silhouette of an old friend, Arthur appeared before them. He had perished on the very night their mystical journey had begun. Arthur, standing in front of them, exuded an invisible, chilling aura, as if he were part of the dark world. His eyes gleamed in the darkness, as if probing their souls. He uttered the words they had read on the parchment earlier, as if transporting them to the very heart of dark secrets and forgotten fears. Elliot and Lucas heard every word, and their hearts raced so fast it felt like they were about to burst. "You have awakened evil. Your creed compelled us to return from the shadows. We have been locked away for far too long, and now we are free. Your attempts at redemption are futile." Arthur's voice resonated in their minds, like a blood-chilling whisper. The brothers stared at Arthur, unable to believe their eyes, unable to accept that their old friend had become a part of the darkness they had awakened. Their hands trembled, and a mixture of horror and despair raged within them. In that darkness, they realized that their pursuit of redemption might lead to even more dreadful consequences. Arthur stood before them, like a living embodiment of darkness, ready to engulf them entirely. His voice sounded like an echo from the past, and each word seemed imbued with malevolence. "You thought your ritual would bring redemption? No, you merely awakened the forces that slumbered in the shadows. For centuries, we awaited our moment, and you provided it. Your prayers and sacrifices have become the key to our liberation." Arthur's voice echoed throughout the temple, like the music of darkness. Elliot and Lucas couldn't believe their ears. Their entire struggle, all their attempts at redemption, had turned into a sinister trap. They realized that the ritual they had performed was precisely what these forces needed. They had become an anchor, bridging the worlds. The brothers felt the magic and evil enveloping them like a web. They understood that their intentions had been turned against them, that they had become puppets in the hands of ancient and mighty forces against which they had nothing to resist. Their resolve weakened, and their hearts beat heavily under the oppressive threat. "Now that our worlds are connected, we shall rise to the surface. We will reign in this world, and you will serve us. Your redemption will become your torment," Arthur proclaimed, and a cold fire began to rise around them. Elliot and Lucas knew that time was running out, that they were facing their last, horrifying trial. Their hope faded, replaced by a sense of despair. However, in their eyes, the fire of determination still burned, and they resolved not to become prey to this darkness, but to try and defeat it, even if it meant their final battle. Under the pressure of the darkness that possessed Arthur, Elliot and Lucas decided that they had only one option left: to attempt a counter-ritual that would conceal the worlds back into their ordinary realities, and sever the connection with the dark forces. With no guarantees of success, they began preparing for their last, terrifying battle. Returning to the temple's altar, the brothers started arranging scrolls and ingredients for the counter-ritual. Elliot, holding an ancient scroll in his hands, began reciting a text filled with ancient spells and forgotten prayers. The words of his voice sounded distorted, as if his speech were a portal between worlds. Meanwhile, Lucas kindled fires around the altar, creating a protective circle. The fire reflected the determination and fear shining in his eyes. Fear of what they might lose, fear of the world slipping into darkness. The counter-ritual started to envelop them, like a whirlwind of magic and energy. Quivering shadows began to form around them, as if the worlds were beginning to separate, allowing passage between them. The ground trembled as if responding to their call. Elliot and Lucas felt their bodies fill with power, as if they were becoming points of contact between the worlds. Their voices merged, creating a sound that intertwined with the roar of darkness and the whisper of fear. They looked at each other, and their gazes conveyed their readiness to go all the way. Suddenly, the entire temple began to resonate with energy. as if coming to life, melting into a single entity. Like a monstrous breath, darkness engulfed them, but the brothers resisted, fighting for light and hope. As the words of the counter-ritual approached their conclusion, their voices grew even stronger, and the power of the counter-ritual began to wane within them. They felt the world shifting, and darkness began to recede, as if retreating before a storm of light. Finally, the last words of the counter-ritual were born on the lips of Elliot and Lucas. Everything around them began to shine brightly, as if a new morning had dawned after a long night. Their voices sounded strong and resolute, like warriors against the darkness, carrying the burden of the entire world on their shoulders. At that moment, as the counter-ritual reached its climax, the temple began to crack and tremble. The darkness began to dissipate, as if vanishing into nothingness. Elliot and Lucas looked at the result of their struggle, feeling their hearts relieved of the burden they had carried. The darkness disappeared, and before them lay a world, free from its captivity. The brothers realized that despite the fear and despair, they had managed to restore light and hope, saving the worlds from oblivion and darkness. Their journey had been arduous and terrifying, but they had proven that even in the face of the darkest forces, one can stand strong if there is a bright will within. Light had reclaimed its power, and darkness had receded, leaving behind only the faint glimmers of the night stars. Elliot and Lucas stood before the sacred temple, feeling the weight of victory and the sacrifice they had had to make. However, amidst the joy, they also felt a heavy loss. Elliot turned to Lucas, his eyes filled with bitterness. They knew that in this battle, one life had been taken, Lucas's life. He had sacrificed himself to save the worlds from darkness. Lucas stood at the threshold of the temple, his figure seemingly dissolving into the darkness. He looked at his brother, smiling with a weak but sincere smile. His voice sounded weak but full of spiritual strength. "Elliot, I cannot stay. My path lies in another world. But remember, you are never alone. We will always be together, even if separated by worlds. Keep moving forward and carry the light into this world." Lucas's words were like a message carried by the wind from afar. Elliot felt that his brother had left him his strength, his faith, and his struggle. He knew that their paths had diverged, but their souls would always be connected. A bright radiance began to surround Lucas, as if he became a part of the starry sky. He slowly disappeared, leaving Elliot alone in front of the temple where their mystical journey had begun. Elliot stood there, gazing at the sky, feeling a blend of sorrow and hope. He knew that Lucas was no longer by his side, but he also knew that his brother would always be with him, even in another world. And so, Elliot continued his journey, carrying within him the bright legacy of the struggle they had fought together.